Mini episode 1618 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1618. This is Rick Morris here, FDH managing partner, along with one of our favorite FDH Lounge dignitaries, Ben Chu, our FDH NBA analyst, and he is here today for the obvious purpose of breaking down Victor Wembanyama to the Spurs. We now know how the 2023 NBA draft lottery shook out, and again, to what should have been nobody's surprise, if it's a year when there's a franchise big man available, it's going to be the Spurs at number one, as it was previously in, 87, I think, with David Robinson, in 97 with Tim Duncan, and somebody who is poised to be right up alongside. And the better career of the two, with no offense to David Robinson, was Tim Duncan, arguably a top 10 career of all time, and that is potentially what awaits Victor Wembanyama. And a man of such immense skills, and we'll talk about the combination of skills that he brings. The only real question at this point seems to be if he holds up physically, because somebody 7'5" and above, there's not a tremendous amount of history of that, of being able to hold up. He is relatively thin at this point, not Chet Holmgren thin, but relatively lithe himself here. So it's the physical thing. That is basically the only question that anybody has about him at this point, which is one heck of a compliment to one kind of a talent he is. Ben Chu, welcome back to the program here, my man, and I know you're as intrigued as I am by where he just went.
Yeah, I am completely intrigued too, but also I want to make sure we get the facts involved, Rick. David Robinson was an 89.
89, okay.
Pick, so.
Okay, that's what I guess
we're listening. 87, I just don't want, you know the protocol I like to say, Rick Morris. I don't want the trolls out there to get you on.
Yeah.
This dude just said David Robinson was an 87 pick.
Yeah, well, I thought there was a delay with the Navy. I know he was in the Navy, and I don't remember.
He was, the fun story with Robinson was that he actually would have been ranked 87.
Okay, and that's where the funny thing is, at that
time, before, I think it was the early 2000s. It was a 2-year.
Okay, yeah, and so this is where I throw under the bus somebody from, I think, the CNN International channel, their sports show. I swear to God, I heard on there before David Robinson 87, so I'm going to throw them under the bus for this. But
throw them under the bus. Right?
Yes, exactly.
It's proper.
Yes, and
I believe in one thing, and that one thing, Rick Morris, is facts. And the fact is, I've made a lot of errors in my life, Rick, but the one thing I know is not an error is that David Robinson was drafted in 1989.
Of course, the great historian that you are, and of course, you don't even have to be the historian that you are to know about the immense track record of French players with the Spurs. They're the most popular team in France by a wide margin already, with Tony Parker and Boris Diaw. So it's a thing where he's following in the footsteps. And what's really kind of, if there's one part of this that just kind of makes you chuckle as a basketball hardcore, it's that Coach Pop and that system, they've done so much to develop and get the most out of European players. And they have one fall into their lap that they really don't have to develop at all. It's kind of funny the way that goes full circle.
Right, and I feel like if you're removing the NBA landscape and it's like the best landing spot for Victor Wembanyama, it would be San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
Popovich is a championship-level head coach. And on top of that, San Antonio is I would say like a mid-major city in the United States.
Yeah.
So he'll be able to learn about America and just experience America where there will not be a huge, immense pressure on him. Because we talk about this for years, Rick, in terms of how young rookies are impacted by the city or landscape they're drafted into. And I feel like for Wembanyama, it's probably the best of all worlds because he gets to go to a city and a team that has a championship level potential from their rich history alone.
Yeah, and
and at the end of the day, you just have to if you had to write this up for a prospect of Victor Wembanyama, what is your best scenario? San Antonio has to be his best scenario.
I would think so, and also you got the young co-eds just down the road in Austin, hook 'em horns. So you got that going on.
Well, my thing too, just with and I mean, probably you would say, look at Doncic, you probably say the same thing too. Texas is a very interesting state. It has a lot of Republican ideals, has a lot of Democratic ideals. So you'll be more accepted, I think, in the state of Texas, very similar to the state of California in that respect, because there are people with differing viewpoints. And it's also, at the end of the day, what you will say is that it's a franchise that has done incredible work into developing international talent. And for someone like Victor, there is not going to be, I feel, a major rush to be like, he has to win a championship year one.
Right. Now, he comes into a situation where basically his 1A and 1B players at this point, two really excellent emerging swingmen at this point, Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell. It's one of these situations where when you look at what they got there, Jeremy Sochan with a promising rookie season that he had, the core of players that they have. I mean, I'm thinking next year the floor is probably 9 or 10 seed in the play-in, right? I mean, it's unacceptable. Again, assuming everybody's health, but I mean, it's unacceptable if they're back in the lottery next year without getting bounced out of the play-in. That has to be that's how much Victor brings to them right off the bat, right? In terms of juice, I mean, 9 or 10 seeds the floor, right?
Right, and I tend to agree with you there, Rick. I think the major thing is that San Antonio, in terms of let's say if you look at the top 8 teams that were in the lottery, they probably have the weakest overall roster in terms of talent.
Sure.
I would say high-level talent.
Right.
I'm not disrespecting Vassell or Keldon Johnson or Doug McDermott or Jeremy Sochan, who I think are all fantastic players, Zach Collins as well. It's just that if you were to say, let's say, Victor had gone to Detroit, well, you have Kate Cunningham, you have Jaden Ivey, you have a lot of high-level lottery pick talent. And San Antonio was a team last year that kind of was going through the motions for most of the season.
Yep.
There was a discussion earlier before, just as the lottery was, it says if Victor dropped to, let's say, Portland or below, there are some teams there that had enough high-level talent that you could literally say if Victor was on their team, he could get them to a conference finals or a finals berth easily just with the sheer level of talent that he possesses. But I think it's one of those sort of good news, bad news situations for Victor is that bad news is you don't have a high level of premier NBA talent.
Right.
The good news is you're arguably in the best situation you can be in.
Absolutely. And, yeah, I would agree. I don't think Johnson and Vassell, when this becomes a championship team, they're not your 1A and your 1B.
And I think I like to say this, too, for the Western Conference. It's going to be, I would say, if you're looking at the window of Victor being the dominant force we all think he's going to become, it's now more 2 to 4 year, it's more 3 to 5 years than 1 to 2.
Yeah. Now, that said, I mean, I'm just assuming and looking at this here, when you're looking at the caliber of players they have on their roster, there must be decent cap room available. So the ability to go out and pick up contracts from other teams that they don't like and potentially risk overpaying, but somebody that fits into your system, you could see that happening as well.
Yeah, and on top of that too, Rick, they also acquired a couple of first-round draft picks through some salary cap shredding of some contracts. So
yeah,
they are in a very good spot right now. And honestly, one thing I've even thought of is that for this year, knowing the level of talent on their roster, I would use this almost as an experimental year for Victor, to be honest.
I would kind of agree.
It's more about now building up his body, building up his ability to play a full NBA season. Because Alaba playing in France and playing overseas is a very good and tough experience. But playing a 60 to 65 NBA game season on an average for a player is a lot different.
It is, and it's really kind of funny when you look at it here because how many years did it take OKC to make it to the play-in game? It took a couple of draft classes. to where they could at least make it to the play-in round. And we're saying year one should be the expectation for Victor. That's what separates him from the guys that have come out the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think the major thing with him overall is that it's not about growth in year one and year two. It's about growth in year three and beyond.
Yeah, I would agree. And in looking at this now, the other thing is here too. Now you got to think that this is going to rejuvenate him. But as far as Coach Pop getting up there in age, like what does that do as far as? And again, you got to think he's going to want to stick around a number of years here at this point. But I'm not saying that he had one foot out the door, because I never felt that that was the case. And they were going through their downturn because they knew it was the only way to rebuild, and it could end up in something like this. So I'm not extrapolating anything from the way the last couple of seasons have gone. But there's been speculation here. Remember when there was talk that Coach Pop might turn it over to Becky Harmon at some point? So you have to think at this point, this gives him more juice to keep on going. Basically, they're going to have to drag him out of it at this point, I would think.
Right, and I'm pretty sure, too, with he's going also out of courtesy of the Victor, he's going into a very stable organization.
Yes.
He's not transitioning to, let's say, if we're being totally honest, teams like Houston and Detroit have been kind of dealing with ownership issues and coach issues and player issues. And, it's always good for a generational talent to go to a team that has that sort of market into place.
Yeah.
And for Victor, just as an individual, it's going to be a lot easier for him to transition to the pro game, knowing that he's not going to have to go all out in year one and year two. Because we all know in today's NBA, if you're a generational prospect and you don't win a title in your first 4 years, you're being essentially considered a failure.
That is true, yes. And the expectations for him are going to be otherworldly because, again, 20 years ago, LeBron comes into the league. These are the highest expectations we've heard for anybody since then, as far as somebody with his size and his ability, the size to be able to swat and rebound and do all the things you're supposed to do for a guy of that size, but basically handle the ball like a guard, shoot the ball from anywhere on the court, just the ultimate complete player. I'm looking here at on Wikipedia. It lists a couple of different comparisons. They're saying that he has drawn comparisons to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Ralph Sampson, but Wikipedia doesn't credit who that was. It says ESPN draft analyst Mike Schmitz compared his defensive impact to Rudy Gobert and his shooting potential to Kristaps Porzingis, albeit with better ball handling and passing skills. John Hollinger of The Athletic described his game as a combination of Sampson, Porzingis, and Dirk Nowitzki. Wembanyama models parts of his game after Kevin Durant and Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, all of that sounds basically, I think, pretty accurate. Again, the Gobert part, certainly defensively. And then it's just a matter of, like, offensively who you want to throw in the mix here. I think Durant has to be part of the picture as well. And you start kind of going from there as far as that goes. So any particular players that he reminds you of in any specific ways?
I mean, I really do feel like Sampson is probably your best point comparison because there's not many guys of Victor's size in the NBA's history that has that sort of fluidity that can make outside shots. Let's be honest here, Rick. In a world of, like, if Ralph Sampson had played in this generation, he'd be shooting threes. We all know that.
Yeah.
So it just kind of feels like Sampson's the best narrative. Like, I would say you could also see a little bit, like we said, of Durant. You could see a little bit of Kareem, too, as well, just with the ability. And the athleticism, I would say another flexy guy, with a little bit of, like, we've discussed this, a little bit of Manute in him, too, because of the ability of a bigger player that could stretch the floor.
Yep.
But also still have a major impact on the defensive end. It's going to be very interesting to see, but I honestly think, Rick, the biggest thing for the Spurs is going to be his strength and conditioning first, more than anything else.
Yep. And they're very smart about that.
I would tell the Spurs, like, look, your major goal is to make sure that Wembanyama for the next decade is strong and apparent. Because we've seen guys who have been skinny, who have dealt with foot problems. As we all know, we've discussed this. I'm based in Portland. I've seen this happen over and over again of a guy who's a transcendent talent who just doesn't make it in the league because of injuries.
Yep.
So it's ultimately going to come down to, I think, if I'm San Antonio, I want to give Victor enough look of the league, but I also want to be very wary because I know I do not have the talent around me to win an NBA championship in year one and year two at this point.
True, yeah. I mean, that is definitely the case.
It's currently constructed. Obviously, a lot of things can change from now and the beginning of preseason. But still.
Yeah, they would need a lot of turnover in a short period of time.
They're going to need a lot. I just, with the strength of the Western Conference right now, I just don't see a scenario where San Antonio's current base of talent is enough to beat, let's say, like Denver, or let's say, the Lakers or Memphis or any sort of combination of all. We're in a very strong Western Conference timeline, so I don't think this is a scenario where it's like all of a sudden like Victor is going to play 60 to 70 games and they're going to be the 4th seed in the West.
Yeah, and again, as far as his body goes, the big brains in that front office here, they've done a good job with this over a period of time. They're one of the more advanced organizations in the league in terms of sports science. So they're going to help him put on what he needs to put on while keeping his athleticism and not sacrificing any of that. As far as it goes with the Manute Bol, what you said, I mean, that is one of the great tragedies of our lack of imagination going back over the last couple of decades, that it was just regarded as a circus act whenever he would take the shots from out there. There wasn't anybody that had the presence of mind to say, hey, how much more could this guy unlock if we let him do this on a regular basis if he's any good at it? And, as far as it goes also, too, with what you said about reminding him of Samson, I think we're probably about 3 years removed. I'm going to predict at some point in the year 2026, Ben Chu, there will be a hipster Substack column from you proclaiming that Ralph Sampson was the Wembanyama of the 80s who never got the chance because of injury.
Yeah. I can never rule anything out in that respect, Rick, so.
Yeah, that might be what the future holds. But as far as it goes with this, I mean, the way that he fits in, the way that this immediately catapults the Spurs back to being a marquee team in the league, which, again, even that's kind of funny because in their prime of 99 to 15, when they were, in or winning, most of the time winning NBA Finals, that even then it was a team where they didn't have the Q rating of the Lakers or the Heat or some of the other teams of that time. But they were front burner, even if it was basically the back of the front tier of state of mind in the NBA. And we are returning to that now. I mean, they're not, like you said, it's going to be a couple of years. But that front tier, not only in terms of winning, but also Q rating, because the two go hand in hand. And Victor, I think, is going to be certainly and this is no offense to Duncan, but a flashier player than him. It would be hard not to be. And again, Duncan, very meat and potatoes. I am in no way criticizing the man, but he just kind of, did his job. He was a lunch pail kind of a guy. Victor, with the flair that he has, the highlight reels that are already out there, I mean, this is going to be one of those things where he just captures the imagination so much. You just can't even think of how many nights that he's going to lead off Sports Center or some of these other shows in the years to come.
Yeah, and I think, again, too, is that there is a lot of hype and there is a lot around him. But, again, another solid situation for Victor is that he's going into a franchise that already has a bunch of titles.
Yes.
So there is going to be some expectation on him to win, but this is not like essentially the savior complex a lot of these other NBA organizations had. So that's going to benefit him as well, because they'll be able to develop him and make him into a guy who can survive an NBA season and playoffs. Because we've seen, especially in recent memory, just with the pace of play and just with how the game is different now, that we're seeing more injuries in the playoffs than ever before. So it's going to be important to keep him in relative level of health at the end of the day.
Yes, and this is one of these things where in terms of surviving the grind of the game, particularly being a mega superstar player, he's got a guy right there who can be in his ear on a regular basis in the organization, in Tim Duncan. And then you got to think David Robinson also at any point in time is only a phone call away as well. So the close-knit
and on top of that, too, is like also Ginobili's involved with the organization as well.
Yep,
so.
That's true. So, I mean...
And it won't shock me if Tony Parker also will have his ear as well.
How could he not, right? I mean, the biggest player, I think, in the history of French basketball as relates to the NBA, and a guy who did it in that jersey. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a rallying around effect with this guy to where... And it's funny because, again... You look at it, it's hard not to compare and contrast like with LeBron. Again, I saw it 20 years ago. He goes to the hometown team, my Cleveland Cavaliers, and gets here. And exactly what would you say was a support system at the time when he was here? You know, it just, no offense to anybody, not to throw stones or anything, but it was the exact opposite end of the spectrum, because they had been tanking hard without a winning heritage, because the great Cavs teams of the late 80s, early 90s were a long distant memory by that point, and they didn't have anything to draw off of. The Spurs, they've been down and out the last couple of years, but you know what? You can do that for a period of time when you had that winning heritage to draw off of, and as soon as you get the next foundational piece in place, boom, you've got all the great figures from the previous era, including not least of which the coach of the previous era, right there to rally around and help boost you to the next level. So, I mean, I see exactly what you're talking about when you say the perfect landing spot. It really, really is. No doubt about it.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too, especially with this upcoming draft, is that the top three is going to be very interesting to see how that shakes out. Outside Victor, we all know is Victor, but where Brandon Miller will play, where Scoot Henderson's going to play, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
It is going to be, because other teams are going to have choices to make now that their great hopes have been dashed of being able to get him to play in their uniform here. And I know you said to me already off here, you think there's a pretty good chance that Scoot is going to drop to 3 in Portland, and boy, would they love that.
Right. I feel, too, is that it's a very interesting world for, like, the top 5, essentially. I mean, I'll lead off with outside of Charlotte and Portland. I do feel like, you know, it sucks that Detroit kind of got the short end of the stick, dropping from the worst overall team, essentially, to the 5th overall seed. But I think they'll be happy, and same thing with Houston Rockets with one of the Thompson twins, because they're both fantastic players and very heady guys. So they strike me as guys that are going to be very good, just in overall. In Charlotte, all I could say is Michael Jordan somewhere was punching the sky in that moment, Rick Morris, because he was so close to changing the legacy of the Hornets franchise with that single pick alone. And they'll have an interesting decision, because to me, visually, Brandon Miller is probably the better fit with LaMelo Ball. But Scoot Henderson, I honestly think if this was any other NBA draft, he would be the overall number 1 pick. So
yeah,
either Scoot's going to go to Portland, and it's going to be a whole lot of discussion of whether is it time to jettison Damian Lillard. Will Dame White want to play with him? Because there's been discussion that Scoot has been in contact with him prior. He apparently said Dame was one of his favorite players in the NBA. So at least I would like to say that there's some cognizance on Scoot's part on Damian Lillard's part, that if Portland was to take Scoot Henderson, it might not be his ideal guy right now, but 2 to 3 years down the road, while he's at the back 5 of his career, he might finally get the guy he really wants as a partner, just in general. But it's very interesting to see how 2-3 is going to play out. Because normally, Rick, in a draft of a Wembanyama, we're always talking like, oh, you know, there's not a lot after him. But no, this is a very deep top 5 of the draft.
It is very interesting. The question on Portland, they made it work once before with Lillard and McCollum. It was a relatively small backcourt. Can they do it again? Can Lillard and Henderson play together in that sense on the defensive side of the ball?
I do think they could. It's going to be very interesting because when Henderson was playing at G League Ignite, he kind of dominated the ball.
Mm-hmm.
But he also doesn't strike me as a player who is selfish. You know what I mean, Rick?
Right.
He strikes me as a guy who he will make the correct basketball decision more than anything else.
Right.
And one thing I will know is that in comparison to, let's say, CJ or Anthony Simons, who's currently on the roster, Henderson has like a wingspan of 6'8", 6'9".
Yep.
So we say he's 6'2", but if you have like a 6 or 7 inch arm length, you're going in most cases, if you're like the off guard or the 2 guard, you're at least going to get your hands on the ball in most cases. So
absolutely,
it's going to be very interesting too, because Portland, I think, is in the ultimate catbird seat, which is you can either trade the 3rd pick, who will probably be either Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson, and get a guy like, there's the rumor mill that I've been hearing out here in Portland, guys like Pascal Siakam from Toronto, Bradley Beal from the Wizards, Karl Anthony Towns from Minnesota. sort of a guy who could be sort of, I'm putting this out there now, Rick. It's a dark horse, but a lot of people have been talking about it. Brooklyn might be willing to give up Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson for the 3rd overall pick. So it's going to get very interesting. For Portland, who has gone through so many sort of weird seasons, they're in the ultimate catbird seat, Rick, because they are now in a scenario where they can either rebrand the team with Scoot and rebrand the team with, let's say, Scoot and Shaden Sharp, or Scoot, or essentially Brandon Miller and Shaden Sharp. Or you can go the other way and essentially say, look, we now have a trade chip that a lot of teams are going to want, and we can finally get Dame a legitimate all-star to play with. So outside of the big winners that were the San Antonio Spurs, I think the Portland Trailblazers were the second biggest winners of the night.
Well, yeah, and if Charlotte overthinks it and doesn't take Scoot Henderson, who, like I believe the same thing as you,
and that I think the biggest thing for Charlotte, Rick, it's not in terms of they don't want Scoot, is that I think the discussion will be that LaMelo dominates the ball so much.
Yeah, true.
And it strikes me as like, I don't know if that will work, because Scoot, to me, is a player who kind of needs the ball in his hands from time to time. Well, now, obviously, I know that's going to be a very similar situation to Portland, but the analogy I would make, though, is that if Scoot's favorite player is Damian, or one of his favorite guys is Damian Lillard, just as a human, I would think he'd be willing to learn and defer.
Well, and this is one of these things, too, where, and again, don't at me, Papa Ball, but if it's a choice between LaMelo Ball and Scoot Henderson, I'd say you move Ball if you find that they can't coexist. I like Scoot's upside.
I also think, too, one thing I'll note, too, Rick, is that if you look at the current roster construction of Charlotte, taking Alabama's Brandon Miller is a better decision.
Well, and that's one of those things
just
here,
visually
too.
To me, just not looking at their roster.
If Charlotte overthinks it, if they pass on Henderson and take Miller, then again, that gives Portland such a valuable chip there with Scoot Henderson. And again, and I'm not predicting the kind of career he's going to have like Jordan, but as far as like, this might make up for 84 a little bit if Scoot Henderson drops to them this time. That is, of course, if they don't go in another direction like they did in 84. But in looking at this here, this notion that Portland could trade that 3rd pick for Karl Anthony Towns or Siakam or whatever, I get it if it's Henderson. If it's Brandon Miller, then whoever makes that trade and trades an established superstar for Brandon Miller is setting themselves up to get fired. So, I mean, this could be history in the making.
But also, too, note, Rick, is that Brandon Miller has been sort of going up the boards.
Yeah.
I think we've discussed it. We both have the same opinion of Brandon Miller. I think he's going to be a solid player, but I feel like he's getting overdrafted.
Yeah. Well, I mean...
But I kind of feel like if I'm Portland in a draft that is clearly top 3 heavy, that pick is going to be a lot more important for a lot of teams who might be trying to make a move towards their future.
Well, he added a new
let's
wrinkle.
Let's say if they had fallen out of the top 5, a completely separate scenario. So
right. Well,
the best analogy I can make, Rick Morris, is that Portland's now in a situation where the hottest girl in high school broke up with them, but then they just realized the hottest girl in high school broke up with them.
Yeah.
So there's so many other options now.
That's right.
So at the end of the day, and I will say, too, another winner on the night, I think everyone in Boston, Cleveland, Philly, New York, Miami all took a big exhale.
Yes.
That Wembanyama is not going to the Eastern Conference, so they will not have to deal with that scenario until the NBA Finals.
Not going to Orlando, where Ball would be the small forward and Franz Wagner would be the shooting guard. So, yes, we're all happy.
There's just a lot of scenarios for it was a big win for the Eastern Conference because I do think Victor has the capability to get a team to a conference finals in his first couple years.
Well, the one thing that we can say...
I feel like for a lot of franchises, spoiled a lot of plans.
I think so. And in all fairness to Brandon Miller, since the beginning of the year, he has added a new wrinkle to his game. He certainly facilitates his teammates shooting, does he not, Ben Chu?
You see, if I've learned anything, Rick, the sources are saying they did not. So.
Well,
we will see. There's at least from what I've heard in terms of the scouts, that he's a player who is a stand-up individual and is a talented player which is good news because I have a damn feeling that Charlotte's going to get caught by that.
Well,
someone based in Portland. So,
well, exactly.
There's nothing more important in my world, Rick, to see a scenario of Lillard, Scoot Henderson, and Shaden Sharp as your top three guys. So,
well, and Simon's in the mix too. That's pretty.
They're, like I said, Portland's in a very interesting situation because there's legitimate thoughts. I would even say 6 months ago that Lillard was essentially going to ask out.
Right.
And now things get a lot more interesting. Now.
Well, and then you're starting to get to the point, are you not, that if you're able to get Scoot there, of where maybe you're flipping Sharp or Simons for a big man, and you kind of even out that roster a little more, yes?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like, too, it's like Portland's one of these weird teams in the West that if they just get another all-star caliber guy to play by Lillard, they'll be right back into the playoff mix.
Yes.
Because I'll be brutally honest, outside of Denver, I'm not so sure about any other team in the Western Conference right now. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of very good teams, but they do have holes out there, definitely. And, but again, in circling back around here, it was Victor Wembanyama's night, as we knew that it would be, just a matter of where he was going to go. And it ends up being San Antonio. And humble though he is, Ben Chu, I have it on good record that he conveyed to Adam Silver last night that he considered on that occasion that his digestive system was part of the Constitution, Ben Chu. I have that on good record.
We'll go there.
Yes, exactly. Another topic I'd like to explore on a completely separate show once we get to the end of the run here. So,
look, all I have to say, Rick, is that I appreciate ESPN sending Brian Windhorst to hang out with him for a couple of hours. So.
That had to be interesting. Probably hearing about LeBron
look,
stories.
Brian Windhorst, I get a free trip to Paris.
Well, exactly, and it's a once in a lifetime kind of a deal for that young man. So I'm sure he's enjoying it. He's enjoying where he's ended up. The journey starts here, and I definitely want to circle back around the time of the NBA draft here with you, Ben Chu, and pick up a little more. Of course, we'll be getting to the NBA Finals subsequently as well. You have an 8-year winning streak on this show to uphold, my man. So 8 years in a row, you've correctly picked the winner of the NBA Finals. I know you're going to make it 9.
You see, now you're just jinxing me now, Rick.
This is not the Morris reverse jinx. I believe in you. I believe in you, buddy.
Rick, all I like to say is at the end of the day, I hope I'm correct, and I hope the matchup is discerning enough for me to be correct.
I think it will be. I think it's shaping up to be that way. We shall see as we get a little bit closer. But again, thank you so much for your time, Ben Chu. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for FDH Lounge Mini Episode 1618.